Hello War of the Visions fans, I'm Jackie Fox, and today we're going to be talking about how to compete at the highest levels. This should be good enough advice that it will help you in PvP, PvE, guild battle, wherever you want to test your units at their highest strength. This advice should help you. But before we get into that, and before we get into Exia, who I'm actually going to be talking about first because she factors very heavily into my arena composition that's going for number 1 this week, I figure if I take top 10 for a couple of times over the next couple of weeks, I should have enough medals to fully reincarnate him and be able to test him out for the channel. So my side quest is to get as high as I can in arena for the next couple of weeks. And pulling Sadali was a big help to that. Even though this is a mono Earth team, and even though it's going to do really poorly into the matchup that you're watching right now, I was able to beat enough things, enough meta things, enough brand new things with this team. And just like brutally so in some cases. This team was a very good one for coming out the other side, maybe almost fully healed. Generally with the exception of Bradley. A lot of people told me as I was putting this out there that Bradley was absolutely the weak point on my team, but honestly running a fully reincarnated Veritas of the Earth wasn't better. I mean, it did help me win better the matches that it did win, but the main way that this team wins is by absolutely overwhelming people with damage and lapping them, getting more turn priority than them so that they can keep some long chains going, keep getting CT up as they keep attacking and all of that kind of stuff. And that strategy works against a lot of people. And in fact, I'm in 8th place right now as of recording that video, which was last week. But this week, I pulled Exia, and I knew Exia was going to be good with Sadali. I'd already looked into that plenty, but I wasn't so sure that she would be perfect on this team, even though she did do really well in the all the guild battle stuff that I had made before I started working with her. And as you can see, she has some really impressive resistances. One that's going to be pretty relevant for me, I wish I could get her across my party, but one that's going to be relevant for me is the Berserk resistance. Into fire teams, one of my biggest problems was people who had Viga's TMR and could use Jealous Wrath to apply Berserk to their hits in a similar way to Tranquil Spirit applying Silence. So very similar. You know, that can be a problem. Also, there's a lot of fire up right now, and there's also a lot of teams that were countering my original team really well, that are like 2 fire units and 1 wind unit. Well, this is kind of the inverse of that if I put her on my team. Now I have 1 unit that can counter 2 out of 3 of theirs, and honestly she has a pretty good matchup into Shurika as well, as she's pretty good into magic for the most part, but also is a magic DPS herself, so she can really chip away at Shurika quite quickly compared to a lot of other units. And this sort of being good into physical has caused, very recently, Shurika and Gilgamesh to get a little bit weaker. I'm not saying that they aren't amazing. Shurika in particular really counters my team well because she can hit both of my Earth characters at once, so kind of doing max damage when she's there. But also because she is resistant to silence. So all of my Ash and Mont strategies just aren't going to work on her at all. But before we get any further, I do want to go ahead and cover exactly what Exia is bringing to the table here. First off, her TMR is great for mages and has great general effects as well. It's also a good nullifier, especially for mages. That silence nullification is a way to counter my Mont strategy, and also to insulate me against other people's Monts who might be doing similar things. Speaking of which, this is Riken Ninja's team. We were able to test a little bit during Arena with our best teams, and I showed him how to counter Mont's silence on his team, which ended up being a combination of Trust Runes and TMR. So in this particular fight, I don't think you're going to see me silence him. I think this was... We tested a couple of different things. But that is going to really help a lot of these teams into a build like I'm considering here. Although that's not my only status ailment that I can hit people with. But in a meta where it's usually 3 mages, it's usually entirely magical power on the other side of the field. or maybe there's like one physical unit like Ash and Mont splashed in, like this team. It's pretty representative of the meta, so silence can become really, really important and really, really helpful for me just shutting other teams down pretty consistently. She also has magic and missile attacks in her kit to be able to get around resistances, but she's not really going to have penetrations for missile, although she can break people's missile resistance, so ultimately she kind of has a way into that as well. So she's really good around getting around strong resists, even though she isn't like a tank buster in the way that her penetrations are built. She reminds me a lot of Aerith, but with most of her healing capabilities replaced with stronger support and more DPS. Aerith was a character that could put out a decent amount of damage, but ultimately it wasn't the best part of her. Her heals were, and because she was so good at damage, she forgot to heal often, which ultimately made her a terribly mixed up character. Though Exia fixes this because she does her healing through follow-up, mainly. Her other natural heals are absolutely crap and should be turned off, and that's one of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. With characters like this, what skills do you turn off to make them more effective, and how does that work into specific metas? The sequence healing also here, while it's not as big as Sadali's, I think it's a little bit more powerful, or maybe at the same power roughly. But it does have a CT up on it, which is just playing even further into the CT shenanigans and being able to lap people with damage that this team is really built to be around. And speaking of that, she buffs herself to have CT up as a threshold, and as a mage she can hold the wizard staff, which also does the same thing. And if she takes enough damage in one hit, and usually she can survive due to courage, she'll actually get both of those CT up triggers at once, pretty much guaranteeing that her next turn will come quickly. She doesn't have a ton of self-healing, especially if you turn off Siphoner. I haven't been brave enough to run Siphoner because it looks like a skill that would do not very much damage but have a decent self-heal. What I found even better though is using Sadali to give her self-healing. That's really helpful, because she certainly does the damage to be able to utilize it. And she can often, because of what I just mentioned, get back enough time to be able to do some damage, maybe take somebody off the field, but also heal herself back up. She also has strong early game support skills. Supplicant and Time Mage are both strong in this respect, though Supplicant is a much better job and has a lot more stuff for her and a lot bigger range of ways that you can both offensively and defensively use that job. It's not damage heavy, but it has some technical skills that can be helpful in that respect. But on the other hand, probably turn everything in Time Mage off but Quicken. I haven't tested her with this yet because I'm scared that she'll use it instead of some of her early buffs, and I think her early buffs are incredibly strong, especially her LB into Fire, and Fire is everywhere right now. In fact, the screen, the team on screen is really representative of what has been benefiting a lot from the bonuses, both in terms of characters, but also map bonuses this week. All three of those characters are doing really, really good. So, you know, I was kind of afraid that she'd use Quicken before, but Riken Ninja actually tested this out for me. Thank you. Another shout out for you, my man. We're going to see him a lot in this video because he's also going for the top 10 this week, as well as one of our other sister guild mates, MRD, who might have come in first last, or I don't remember. He might have come in first last week. I don't know. So definitely a strong competitor there. But Riken Ninja was telling me that she uses most of her other buffs with priority and would use Quicken later in the match, potentially, although he didn't test her enough to see her do it, which seems good. Yeah, I could dig that, because I have seen times where she does have an opportunity to use her supplicant buffs, and she uses those last. So that could be turned into an opportunity for Quicken in certain matches. And I think because she can do long-range damage, getting other units out in front of her keeps her safer, while still allowing her maybe to respond. And we'll talk more about that later. Accuracy potential. She's close to being as accurate as Shurika with the right builds, and you could certainly lean into this further, but she is pretty accurate. I mean, this whole team is for a variety of different reasons. Sadali doesn't start the game with the most accuracy, but he does have that accuracy up on his main buff, and he can give that to the other members of his team. Ashen Mont has an increased accuracy attack, and Exia just has the highest base accuracy in general. So, especially with a good buff rotation, all three of these characters can be pretty accurate, but you would still want to build them for it. By the way, this is a pretty cool trick for testing stuff out. As long as you have the map set right, you can use initial placement to figure out speeds for your characters, and this can be really, really helpful for being able to adjust them to figure out, you know, what's a better order for them. If I'm not mistaken, her base penetrations with good support skills are 40-40, so 40 to spirit, 40 to magic. Again, none to missile, but she can break that, and she can also break a number of different ways. She can break unit attack resistance. Some of those stack, by the way. She does it both the way that Ashen Mont does, but also the way that other characters can as well. So that's a good double combo with him. Also, early game 25% full damage mitigation for 2 hits. This plays into, and you're going to notice, like, the incredible durability of a lot of teams right now, and the way that fights kind of go back and forth and are kind of swingy. Like, everyone's doing a lot of damage, but everyone's also healing pretty consistently too. So, you know, there's a lot of points where you get close to an HP threshold, and then they heal back. You know, we nearly took out that Sephiroth a second ago, but then he got completely healed. And this is what can make a team like mine so powerful, because if people are used to being able to go down that low and then recover, if I can get one more hit in than they're expecting, then some of their units are going to go down pretty early, which is generally good for me. You'll also notice that while I didn't miss recording the initial buff pattern for this particular fight, that they're all grouped up here together, which is pretty great. Affinity bonuses is going to make them all so much faster for this. It will make them a bit weak to AoE, but remember, Sadali has that AoE mitigate or resistance aura around him. So while we would theoretically be weaker to that, I would say that kind of cancels it out. That means that this is a team that can stand by itself for maximum speed without necessarily being easily punished for that, even when you're going up against people who have really strong AoE damage like Flame Wizard and Sephiroth. And I think that's pretty incredible, but you know, that's just Sadali. Let's get back to Exia in particular. Her main job doesn't have any cast times, and that makes at least 2 of her supports basically pointless, but also this isn't something that I would complain about. It's pretty excellent that she has a fully instant kit for the most part. Casting time up is going to affect Quicken and some of the other skills though. So you'll see I'm running good accuracy here on Exia, but also a little bit of evasion across the team. This was kind of an early idea that I played around with. A lot of people are playing into either accuracy or evasion right now, but personally, while I do find the evasion teams that I've come across that were good to be very difficult, even copying as much of their builds as I can, I just can't get that consistent, and there's still a lot of people who are running high accuracy. So there's a lot of people for whom I'm removing a lot of my defenses to be more evasive, and removing kind of a lot of my power to be more evasive, but not getting anything back for it because they can still hit me. So I'm turning off Mortal Coil. I don't think that's really helpful for a team with 2 units that have follow-up hits to really worry about people's courage. Also turning off Priest's Fervor. And I think that's basically the only thing that I've turned off for him. Did get up to 91 evade with this build, which is okay. For Mont, Twofold Reaver is very important, so Spiral Reave is something that I'm turning off. It's good, but Sadali has the ability to do most of those things, even better. So this is hopefully going to get him using all the other skills that I have left on, like Blade of Blinding Ash, but most especially Twofold Reaver, to get more consistent silence really early in the game, try to shut people down right out of the gate. Looking at Exia, the only thing I really have turned off is Siphoner. Everything else is pretty dang good, at least in her main kit. Moving into Supplicant, though, we're going to see some other changes. One, Consecration of Fire. I just don't think that's any good for her, especially with her LB. But these other 4 skills are pretty good with the exception of Supplication, which is that really low-level heal. I just don't think it's good enough to waste her time on, honestly. Her basic attack is a drain. Again, this is Siphoner, and it's going to drain equal HP to its damage. Her damage should be pretty good, but this is a very low modifier, so I wouldn't expect it to do a ton of damage necessarily. But so for most of the week, as I was building up this Exia and didn't know what I could beat with it because I hadn't really experimented enough, I was trying to focus more mainly on like mono fire teams, using that LB and the fire resistance that it grants, as you're seeing here, to kind of strengthen my matchups into fire specifically. Also, that Maneater down on attack is pretty cool because that gets around the field a lot, and we just keep applying it. So it, you know, if it lasts for 3 turns and we can do it for 3 turns and we keep hitting them with it, they're going to have Maneater down for like 6 turns off of her LB, which is pretty cool when you think about it. It's a really great way to just put kid gloves on all of your opponents and make sure that they hit you a little bit softer, which makes it even harder for them to push thresholds in the way that I really want to on this team. So she has a 2-target auto revive removing skill that also heals on KO, which is pretty strong. Now, unfortunately, our matchups into Luciel, I think Luciel can defend re-raise, so that's going to be a lot harder for her to use into Luciel specifically, and that's going to be relevant for a couple of opponents. I mean, we already saw Luciel doing really well on Rika Ninja's team, and I would say more than me, he was in the top ranks for most of the early week. Like number 1 multiple times, like I usually do. On the other hand, I was kind of playing it really slow and just trying to kind of lurk in the top 20, you know, within striking distance of number 1, but I was really waiting and hoping people wouldn't build up an idea of how to counter this brand new unit that I was using. And that's kind of worked out well because I've been holding down number 1, I think, maybe longer than anyone else over the weekend so far. But currently, and we'll see the fight that led to this later, I'm in second, like hundreds of points behind number 1, just kind of waiting until later on to really make my go of it. Looking at her other attacks, though, actually, I want to check on one of these because it does something that I don't expect, and I'm pretty sure it's just piercing, because... Yes. Okay, Meteor Blast has piercing. Cool. So Meteor Blast allows you to break barriers, break shell. It's missile damage, so it's going to get around magic resistance, which is pretty common these days. It'll also break missile resistance by 30, and people don't tend to run too much of this anyways, so that's probably most of it, if not all of it, if not making them literally weak to missile at this point. So that could be pretty cool. It's also going to break their healing power by 50. And piercing means that because this has just an incredible range, it's one of the most long-range skills in the game, it kind of keeps up with even Shurika's range. It's going to be a lot easier than you expect to line up 2 characters within this, because it's going to go straight through anything, and she's going to aim for the furthest back thing she can. So while Meteor Blast is technically a single target attack that only hits 1 character, especially with this kind of nutty range, it's going to hit 2 characters a lot more reliably than you would expect, and these debuffs are really, really important and really cool for the team. She also has a really strong 2-target 60% unit attack resistance shred. So this is up there with Mont's LB and one of his other skills. 35% chance to sleep, which is slightly boosted from the base rate, which is going to be good for her. It's also going to reduce physical damage by 20% for those targets. And then it's going to have a sequence single target heal with CT up 150. So she'll heal herself or anyone within range, and the range is pretty decent on this skill. And that CT up is just going to be another way that we can add to our rushiness and our ability to put out more damage more quickly than people generally expect. And this also makes for a really good opening into the follow-up skills that Sadali and Mont are really going to be rocking here. But I'm going to move things around a little bit. I've been checking out one of the team compositions that is a similar Earth composition to this, but without Exia, and I'm going to see if I can make that work. One of my problems was that Sadali was one of the faster members of my team because he has good base agility. And basically, I pushed the agility of my other two characters as much as I could so that they would both be faster to him, hoping that they would both run to his side and all group up early, so that by the time he took his turn, they were both in position to be buffed by him, meaning that both Exia and Mont would be getting the HP drain, the accuracy up, the Man-Eater up. All of these things are super important for each one of these characters, and this buff pattern and setup guarantees that everyone gets hit with that buff. Now, I do have to sacrifice a little bit of defenses because Mont has a really good defensive buff that he likes to apply to everyone, and other teams that have utilized that as their center point have been good too. But I just gotta say, Sadali's buff is so important for everything that I would rather Exia not get that extra defenses, because Exia's buffs are really big and really aimable, so even though she's off to the side, she'll still be able to buff both of them, so she's not losing out on anything, and she's really gaining a ton from it. Here's another team that's using the same kind of pattern. They're also using Exia and Sadali too. This is what I think of as the current whale team, because these are just the three newest characters in the game. And, you know, they actually do have a lot of synergy, at least because two of them are glove units, and Devout's fit pretty well onto most teams. But, in particular, I don't think this team was... like, super strong in the way that they had their advantages built on their vision cards, or at least they weren't built super strong for Exia specifically, if I remember correctly, because she is the harder unit to fit onto this team. So they're still trying to figure it out themselves, and I gotta say, this team that I'm going up against is still very strong. Oh my god, so many people are asleep right now. At least people are sleeping on both sides of the field. Oh. So much sleep in this fight. Because both Ash and Mont, through his counter skill, and Exia are going to be sleeping people. That's another status that can be really rough with this team. If we don't silence your mages, we'll just put you to sleep. And it's unlikely that you resist both of those things. So that covers all of Exia's offensive kit, but let's start talking about her buffs, because she is a very supportive unit, and I think that this is a really important part of her kit. She is a support / DPS in a lot of ways, with a little bit of healing sprinkled in. So her self buff is going to give her 40% magic, shell, and the ability to reduce single target resistance 15% on attack before dealing damage. So she just kind of gets an automatic 15 unit attack resistance penetration. For her buddy buff, 25 AoE resistance, which is going to kind of make up for not getting hit by Mont's, although this does stack with Mont's form of AoE buffing, or AoE resistance buffing. 30 debuff weakening. I think Mont and Sadali both have a lot of debuff weakening already in their kit, so they can both be really good with this. This can kind of push them closer to 100. It's going to seal haste, damage up, and all buffs removal. So it's going to stop people after you do damage from dispelling you, which is actually very strong. Let's see. It also gives her courage. Hate down 6, which is great for a support. It's going to mean that she gets 3 hits in before people really start targeting her. And CT up 200 at 20% HP. And I know I just read that a little weird, but the hate down and the CT up happen at the same time. It's both of those when she hits 20% HP as a threshold. Now, let's talk about her LB buff. This is going to give 25% fire resistance in both this and the buddy buff. And when I say buddy buff, it's pretty big and well aimable. But her LB buff, 25% fire resistance, damage up, both types, 30%, critical evasion, 30%, decrease Man-Eater 20 on hit to everyone on your team, and it gives her 150 CT to get her into the action even faster after that. Looking at her supplicant job, the magic is kind of weak here, but it does give her non-elemental options, and it does also give her the ability to reduce all attacks resistance, which is pretty cool. Also, since I'm trying to run this into fire teams, I'm going to go ahead and build up my Tide Ring. As long as I'm not facing an evasive fire team, and they are fairly common, this should be the better piece of accessory for her. But outside of that, I would say the Marshmallow Hat is really good for her, because when you combine the Marshmallow Hat and her TMR buff, you're nullifying most statuses on her, which is pretty good, and it's one of the best accuracy boosting accessories in the game as well, so it really maximizes her accuracy too. Looking at support skills for Supplicant, Divine Invocation gives attack and magic 40 and agility of 25%, which is pretty cool. I would say that having the agility buff, if you can use it well, is maybe better than Quicken, but especially when it comes with all that. But at the same time, Time Mage has Quicken. I would probably turn most of the rest of it off, but Quicken is good. Her main sub gives Demon Killer, a lot of Demon Killer. Also raises the damage cap by 4,000 points. I guess this is relevant against Abara in PvP, but this is mainly something that you're going to use in PvE. And her other skill breaks, it's a piercing long-range Devitalizer. So this is likely to hit two characters, much like Meteor Blast, and it's going to break their agility. It doesn't do much more than that. It's not a particularly amazing skill, but this is also a really good effect to have in PvE, especially if you line up with the right boss that's both a demon and weak to being devitalized. Then you're really going to break this guy down. And then she generally has good resist to fire, to magic, to berserk, and to curse. But my notes for her is she really needs more healing bulk and AoE resistance. The healing bulk she can get in this team from Sadali. That HP drain is going to be a big deal for her and very helpful and very good at keeping her in the fight. Especially when combined with her courage, which is kind of something that Sadali is missing. Of course, this team has 2 out of 3 characters that rely on courage as well, so courage removal can be pretty important for countering it too. But I think this is Friday night. I have finally stopped sandbagging and have fought my way to the top, and I am in number 1. Not the last time in the week, but I think this was the first. Another thing about Exia is she could probably use a little bit more AoE resistance. She has good AoE resistance, don't get me wrong, but I mean, she has more unit attack resistance, and with her hate down, especially with AoE resistance, she might be able to heal back and survive a lot more easily if she had good AoE resistance there. And she does get it on buff, but the wider area attack resistance from Mont that stacks with that could be really helpful for her. This isn't by any means the only character that has this. Like, Helena the Black Rose could also be another character that could give her this type of defense and really help stack that AoE resistance up. Because, again, with the hate down, with her being more supportive early in the match, also more likely to be in your back row after buff patterns and everything, especially, you know, because she has so many like group or buddy buffs that she's often getting behind people or running to people instead of running forward like these two boys tend to do after they get their first buffs off of the fight. And again, that's a big thing. That means that she's mainly going to be getting hit with splash damage in most cases, just like we were seeing there. instead of being like explicitly targeted herself, especially when the other two members of her team are so happy to run into the thick of battle and just hit everything they possibly can. Like, the enemy is going to be far madder at Mont and Sadali than they'll ever be at Exia, especially after she manages to take enough damage to trigger that hate down. Then, you know, that's really going to emphasize the AoE resistance on her. Unfortunately, in this particular buff pattern, I can only get one of those two things, and I feel like giving her the ability to heal herself for a couple of turns, as well as the accuracy of the Maneater, that's probably a lot more important than getting a little bit of extra unit attack resistance and a little bit of extra wider area attack resistance. But again, it is worth pointing out that those three effects between her and Mont's friendly buffs do stack very well to give you really strong resistances to AoE, because you have two types of resistances to them, two layers, but also it gives you unit attack resistance, and that's in combination going to give you resistance to all damage in the game no matter what, because it has to be one of those two things. So here we are. I actually spotted Rican Ninja using this team, which Luciel is really powerful on their team. Really, really good. Also, fun little glitch, earlier, it said we were both in first place when I was several thousand points behind in second, I think. But I was, you know, trying to take this guy out at first, and he set up this defensive team, and, you know, while both of our teams, being very similar, we're both pretty weak to Shurika, Shurika's pretty weak to Gilgamesh, so I think this team is helping him hold out at number one, but we're kind of attacking this team from a different direction. We're not using Shurika to beat this. We want to overwhelm everyone, and we want to overwhelm them mainly with magical damage, and that's not something that Gilgamesh is particularly good into. So this team usually ended up being a little bit of an easier win for us than Luciel, who beats us in a lot of cases. And, you know, this is one of those reasons why you want to keep testing certain teams and, like, certain players throughout the week as they change teams or as they adjust things, because they could get, as my team did, a lot stronger, or relative to your team, maybe they make a change that makes them better into what they're fighting and weaker to you. For instance, me removing the Marshmallow Hat for heightened accuracy and status resistance from Exia to fight fire teams with the Tide Ring. I'm losing out now to anyone who's running high evasion. I'm losing out to people who are running some of those statuses that she doesn't already deal with, which isn't that big a deal, but they are fairly helpful. You know, like, especially kind of relevant could be sleep in particular, especially into, like, the Ashen Monts that we're seeing up here, or other Exias. So for some people, if you're running, like, fire without evasion, this is going to make that version of my team, just because I changed one accessory, that much worse for you. But if you're not running fire, you're running evasion, then my team is now using that accessory slot to specialize against something that doesn't even affect you. So again, keeping an eye on people's builds, keeping an eye on how they set their teams up, keeping an eye on what units they're running, that's how you get yourself to number one. And there's me getting to number one against, this was against Rican Ninja, I think, Saturday night. So after Saturday night, because I went to sleep in first place, but I went to sleep relatively early because I wanted to have some energy left for Sunday. So I was happy to get myself in first. I was happy to see our fellow kind of guild folk, MRD and Rican Ninja, doing well in the rankings. But when I woke up today, I think I was in either 8th or 10th place, and I started looking into who was number one, because it wasn't that there weren't other teams that I couldn't beat, but number one had a big score, well, not a big score advantage, but, you know, between me and number one was like 10,000 points. They had already started climbing for the day, basically, and were starting to build their advantage. So I figured if I could beat them, I could probably beat them 10 or 15 times, it actually only ended up being about 10 before I caught up with them. And that would allow me to climb really effectively. If only I could beat this team at number 1. Now we know at least a couple of these units don't have a great matchup into me, and this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier in the video, about how they don't really have the vision cards or anything, or the equipment to support Shurika's earth resistance. So we're going to have a better matchup into this team in particular. But Exia definitely shores this up as well, by quite a bit. So I'm going to let this one play out, and you can see how well we can still do against a team like this and against a unit like this, because I rode this one all the way to number 2 because I needed to use another orb restore to get that last win that I needed to take first place, and I just didn't feel like doing it. So, at least not this early. I still gotta fight like hell tonight to get number 1, but with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. That's the free-to-play option for YouTube. Also, check out the link in the description for more Jackie Fox stuff and ways to help out the channel. You could also join one of my guilds, Gasol Union or Silkus. We are both looking for people, especially right now during Limited. And yeah, ways to support the channel in the description. Leave a comment, tell me what you're thinking. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.